Welcome to the Richard Dolan Show, where every week we fight the good fight. Greetings. Continuing series, my continuing guest. The last few times I've been talking with Michael Schratt, military and aviation and UFO historian. Michael and I have gone into a number of very, very interesting issues relating to the UFO issue, relating to the ours, theirs question, relating to anti-gravity study and research, relating to breathing new life into old and often forgotten UFO cases, all of it. It's been fascinating. Listeners have really enjoyed it, and I'm not done with Michael. I want more and more information. Michael, welcome back.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks a lot.
We're making this a regular thing, and I, for one, am very glad about it. So I'm glad you're here.
Great. Glad to be here.
As you always do, you're so organized, and you sent me a variety of files and slides in advance of this, and we're going to be talking about UFO crash retrievals and a few of them in particular. So I've got my information here. You've got your information there. I think we can jump in very soon, but I guess I just want to start by reminding listeners that the concept of UFO crashes has never really stopped being controversial, but people may not realize that for the first several decades of our awareness of the UFO phenomenon, crash retrievals were really almost never discussed. I mean, they were briefly brought up. Everyone knows about the Roswell Daily Record headline, but that, of course, was then debunked the very next day. Many people are aware that the Aztec UFO crash, which we're going to jump right into, was also written about briefly. It was written about in a book by Frank Scully in 1950, and that was then allegedly debunked shortly after that. And from that point until really the 1980s, people were not talking about UFO crash retrievals almost at all, except very quietly. But in the last several decades, it has become quite prominent. Obviously, everyone's heard of Roswell, but there are many other cases as well. So, and then I would just say that before we jump in here, the last thing is, I think everyone who follows this subject should make themselves aware of the speech given in June of 2018 at the Society of Scientific Exploration by Dr. Hal Puthoff. And this speech, in my view, deals directly with the likelihood of UFO crash retrievals, in which Dr. Puthoff talks about the analysis of an artifact, which he describes as a metamaterial, which I won't go into the details here, but has properties that are, if this is true, well beyond our ability to engineer these kinds of materials even today. And this is an artifact we've known about since at least the 1990s and allegedly came from a UFO crash retrieval in the 40s. So there's new arguments coming out in favor of crash retrievals. But Michael Schratt is here to talk about some very interesting cases, and he's got great illustrations to go with it. So as we've done in the past, we're going to be illustrating this talk here with Michael. So Michael?
Yes.
Thank you for your patience and letting me describe that. So I'm going to say, take it away. You want to jump into Aztec?
Yep, let's go to Aztec.
Let's do it.
Okay, so this is Aztec, New Mexico, March 25th, 1948. The reference for this, as you mentioned, Richard, actually is the William Steinman papers that are located in the Clarksburg, West Virginia library. That's the Gray Barker collection. And then Scott and Suzanne Ramsey have to get credit too, because they spent about 25 years vetting the witnesses and then culminating about 50,000 documents. And so I think they're really unsung heroes in this case, Richard.
Totally agree with you. Scott and Suzanne Ramsey are the Aztec investigators. There were people who came before them. Of course, we just mentioned Frank Scully, who wrote about this way back in 1950. William Steinman, who you just mentioned, also wrote a book on the Aztec crash in the 1980s. It's a good book, but it doesn't have anywhere near the kind of information that Scott and Suzanne Ramsey have gathered in the last couple of decades. And it's an incredible thing because this case was so roundly debunked, supposedly, and even serious UFO researchers for years just would not touch the Aztec, New Mexico case. But now I think because of their painstaking work, and they have done an amazing job with this, this is once again seen as a legitimate crash of a UFO. And I would just add, a non-human, almost certainly extraterrestrial UFO. That's my opinion, but I'd like to hear you go into it now.
Sure, no problem.
Mhm.
Okay, so again, March 25th, 1948 occurred 12.5 miles northeast of Aztec, New Mexico. And this is one of those cases, Richard, where civilians got to the site prior to the military.
Mhm.
And this thing came down at about a 10-degree angle, almost perfectly intact. 99.9 feet in diameter, almost exactly 100 feet in diameter. It
Mhm.
has an upper dome and a lower dome. The upper dome is slightly larger in diameter than the lower dome. And along the outer circumference of the disk, Richard, there are 6 16-inch diameter portholes that are circular in shape that have a kind of a polished mirror image finish, almost like Michael Jackson's glasses, those mirrored glasses that he would wear.
Mhm.
That's almost precisely what these porthole windows look like.
And I
Okay.
guess I should just
Yep.
add that, I mean, all of what you're about to describe really comes from detailed investigation, primarily by Scott and Suzanne Ramsey.
That is
So,
correct.
yeah,
That is
yeah,
correct.
they've really done a lot of the legwork here.
That's correct.
Mhm.
So we're talking about something that has an aluminum exterior finish. And then just to push the story forward really quickly, during the recovery operation, and then after that by many decades, a lot of researchers and people that have just gone to the site. I've never been there personally. Richard, have you been there?
No, I have not.
No,
I've
you
been
haven't.
it's kind of close to it many, many years ago. In fact, I met Scott Ramsey and Suzanne Ramsey in an event back in 2003, and we were close, but we were not at the site.
Okay.
Yeah.
Scott has mentioned to me that there is a 39-inch by 39-inch by 9-inch concrete footer that was used during the recovery operation by the M25 tank transporter. So what I'm theorizing, Richard, is
Mhm.
if there is another one of these, a mirror image one of these, about 8 feet away from the original one, maybe buried down about 4 to 6 inches, if
Uh-huh.
someone dug right at that location approximately 8 feet from this footer and they actually found the other one, it's a done deal, Richard. It's a done deal.
I don't know if we
Yes.
should be saying this now on the radio, because if anyone wants to be covering this up, they're going to rush out there first and
Yeah.
excavate it. So it's
But I
going
mean,
to be a great race.
there's no way they would just have one footer. They'd have another footer right next to it so that when you have these pylons that come down to stabilize the M25 tank transporter, that it would be an evenly distributed weight section.
Hmm.
So by default, there has to be another one. Okay, so let's get into scene number one.
Right.
Is again, the civilians who are the 4 oil workers, they got there before the military. And when they got there, they climbed up the ridge of this craft and were walking toward the center dome of the craft itself. So that's essentially scene number one. And when they got there, Richard, they noticed a small hole in kind of one of the porthole windows. It was cracked and it had a small quarter-shaped hole. Incidentally, before they got there, there was a U.S. Army helicopter that did one orbit around the scene and then departed. And according to Scott Ramsey, who interviewed the last surviving oil worker who was on site, he
Uh-huh.
stated that basically he didn't know what was weirder, Richard, the helicopter or the dish-shaped craft itself.
Yeah,
Because this is
helicopters were not much of a thing in
yeah,
1940.
it wasn't. It was a relatively new invention at the time. And so he just didn't know what was stranger, the helicopter or the dish-shaped
How
craft.
interesting.
Yeah,
How
I thought that
interesting.
was always interesting. So
But
what
you're
they
saying they
did,
get to the top of this though, and they're looking at a hole in
there,
one of these uh, glass portals.
that is correct. That is
Yeah.
correct. So they climbed off the disc itself, went back to their oil field truck. They pulled out a long pole, climbed back over the rim of the disc toward the center dome. And Richard, they stuck this pole through that quarter-shaped crack or hole in the window, and they were jiggling this stick around. And somehow, I don't know how, but somehow they activated a button, and that opened up an entry hatch on the bottom of the craft. And that's how they gain access into the craft itself.
Just by putting a stick through the hole.
Yes, yes. Sounds strange, but that's according to
Mhm.
Scott Ramsey. That's what they did.
Okay.
Now,
All right.
when they got into the craft, what they found on the upper deck or upper level were 2 alien bodies that were slumped over on control consoles. They were about 4.5, maybe 5 feet tall, maybe slightly less than that. They had gray bodies, Richard, almost like they were scorched from decompression. That's something that Scott told me. They had one-piece, tight-fitting blue flight suits. And they were in front of these control consoles that looked like a keyboard, but not quite. So we're not really talking about a laptop here. And then he also said that there was alien iconology written on the inside wall of the upper dome.
I'm looking at the images here. We're showing this for the listeners. Now, are these images just kind of random images that you've created or someone created for?
No, these are done under the strict guidance of Scott Ramsey by Tom Bogan. I spent about 2 months going back and forth with Scott, and we vetted out the details, and that was forwarded to Tom, and he's the one who came up with these.
So but again, I guess I would ask, are these, is there any reason to think that these are accurate in one way or another, or?
I think there's very good reason to believe that these are relatively accurate, because we've got the swivel chairs, we've got the alien iconology, we've got the slumped over, and what also Scott mentioned too is on level 2, which is the rim of the craft itself, there was what looked like compartmented sections that were divided off, and there was another 14 dead bodies found in that section for a grand total of 16 dead corpses.
Yes, that's always been the main number you hear in connection with the Aztec story, and this was what I know. One last thing about the letters, if I may just ask you.
Okay.
Thanks, I know you want to keep moving, but it looks like these letters are there's a shadow behind them on the wall, and so they're somehow suspended in the air. It looks like. You know what I'm saying? So there's a shadow that's thrown behind the letters onto the wall.
Well, somehow they were projected or written within the skin itself, or were either projected. That's the impression I got from Scott. But definitely there was some type of alien iconology written language on the inside wall.
Very interesting. Okay.
So if we go to the next scene, Richard, you'll see a top view looking down of the bodies being laid out on the desert floor. And then you've got a minister giving last rites to these bodies. We know that the military was on site at the time. There was a congressman present, and then at least 2 police officers and at least 2 fire personnel also in this particular scene. And what I thought was interesting, Scott told me that when the Baptist minister went back to his parishioners, he sat them down and said, "You are never going to believe what I just saw." He told them the whole story, and he interviewed the last surviving parishioner who confirmed the minister's account.
My goodness.
Yep. Yeah. So next question is, how do you remove a 99.9 foot diameter dish-shaped craft? How do you get it out of there? Well, here's where it gets a little bit strange. When the military got access to the inner portion of the disc, they found that the whole thing was fastened by a particular type of a pin device. When they deactivated that pin device, Richard, the whole thing divided in 3 equally segmented pie segments. And that's what you see in the next scene.
Right.
So you've got the central column, you've got the upper and lower dome, then you've got these equal segmented 1 by 1/3 pie segments. At this point, they were about, I'd say about 80 yards away, because you couldn't get right toward the craft. They extended these cables, they wrapped them around these pie segments, and they drug these pie segments across the lower brush toward the M25 tank transporters. That's how they got it out of the immediate crash site.
Right. This is in scene number 6. It looks like each one of them is being carried separately.
That is correct. So they brought these onto the M25 tank transporters. They put a tarp with chains covering each segment with the designation explosives on these tarps. And then the whole thing was sent to Los Alamos for review, for reverse engineering, probably try to piece it back together. So in a nutshell, that's the Aztec crash retrieval story.
Fascinating. And again, these images really bring this case to life. It's been discussed over and over again. I think what is worth just mentioning here is the painstaking work that Scott and Suzanne Ramsey have done in getting these details out that you, and then with the excellent work of Tom Bogan, are able to kind of bring these to life here for listeners and viewers.
Absolutely.
But it's really on the Ramseys who did so much of this work in getting these stories out. The account of the craft being separating itself, I had known about this, but it just seems like it's an incredible stroke of good luck, almost too good to be true. But
yeah,
apparently this is what Scott came to and Suzanne came to in their investigation of this. So I'm just going to accept it.
That's absolutely correct. Yeah, this is per Scott and Suzanne Ramsey's research. Absolutely.
Yeah. You also wanted to talk about the Kingman, Arizona case, which is another of these cases that sort of hovered in the kind of in-between state as far as crash retrievals go. It's not like Roswell, but it is known enough, and it's had some support for it. Can I ask you what do you think is the strength of the Kingman, Arizona case in terms of evidence?
The strength is the testimony of Harry Drew, who did a lot of the research, and he talked to Colonel Wendell Stevens, retired, who's no longer with us. And the key deciding factor in this case is a very specific rock structure that Wendell Stevens had talked about, because he was allegedly a part of the retrieval operation. And it's a very specific pyramidal rock structure that cannot be missed whatsoever. And Harry Drew spent so much time going through the Kingman, Arizona desert there, and he actually found this pyramidal rock structure, which made it all the more real for Harry Drew. Yes.
So all according to a description left by the late Wendell Stevens.
That is correct. That is correct.
I do know was very much engaged in this, many other cases, of course. I see. Very good.
Yep. Yep. So without that key piece of evidence, we wouldn't have as much firepower to stand on than we do now. So.
Right. I thank you for bringing it to my attention. So, yeah, please describe the Kingman case. It's not well known enough. So what do we have to say about this?
Okay, so let's go on this one. So this is Kingman, Arizona, May 18th, 1953. Now, it's important to note, Richard, in this particular case, it was not a crash landing. This was a forced landing. This thing was 100% intact. And as we mentioned before, sources of information are retired Colonel Wendell Stevens, Harry Drew, Raymond Fowler interviewed the primary eyewitness on this case, who was an atomic bomb scientist by the name of Arthur G. Stanzel, Stansel. He worked at Air Material Command, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, the Office of Special Studies under Dr. Eric Wang. So that's the primary eyewitness who actually started this whole thing.
Dr. Wang himself is someone I remember speaking to Bill Steinman about, of another very interesting man connected with all of this. And I just want to point out that Ray Fowler, who's still around, is one of the most very deep thinking, intelligent, knowledgeable UFO researchers we have ever had. And so I think it's significant that you have someone of Ray Fowler's caliber doing this interview. And I've always been inclined to accept Ray's judgments as someone who knows what he's talking about. I mean, technically and in every other way.
Yep, the craft was 30 feet in diameter, 14 feet tall. That's what you see in the drawing that I've put together here. Yeah. It had a series of slots going around the outer circumference of the disc. There was a small entry hatch on the lower portion of the rim, a brushed aluminum surface. It was found to be buried about 20 inches into the sand at about a 15-degree angle of attack. There were 4 humanoid figures found with the craft when the military got there. Now, according to Harry Drew, there was one that was in front of the other 3, who apparently was the quote-unquote commander. And just to go a little bit forward in this story, there was a communication between the high-level military brass and this particular commander. And he said, quote-unquote, "We will go with you only under one condition, that you do not separate us." And so that was the communication that was made between members of the retrieval team and also these beings that were, if you look at a 5'10" man, they came up to his shoulder, according to Harry Drew. Now,
There's no description in these illustrations, unless I'm missing it, of these beings.
no,
Do we have
no.
any? Okay.
Only from the testimony from Arthur Stanzel. He said that the eyes were slightly further apart than ours, and they had a pointed chin.